Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Go ahead and get started here today. I'm your humble moderator. My name is Tim Stahl, the Director of Pre-Sales Engineering here at Decisions. Been here about 2 years now, and looking forward to taking any of your questions. Before we dive into that, though, I do want to mention that we do have an event coming up in Norfolk in October, first week there, and that is our Decisions Days. So we have a couple topics here on the screen, but what you'll notice is it's a way for our customers to get together with us in person and really have some great workshops, some breakout sessions, even demo out V7 if you've not had a chance to play with that yet, or ask us any questions as you go through. But a great way to be able to collaborate and communicate with the larger Decisions audience. So again, that is October 4th through 6th in Norfolk. And if you head out to our website, decisions.com/events, you'll be able to find it there, be able to register and go from there. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and dive into the questions. We had some submitted today that I'll tackle first, and once we get through those, then we'll go ahead and open up the floor. But feel free as we're going through to use the Q&A function of your Zoom meeting. You'll notice a little icon with a Q&A and 2 bubbles. You can submit your questions there, and we can depending on time either get to them today or set up to get to them at a future event. So that being said, we had some questions submitted by Radley. I see you're on the call today. We went ahead and gave you the ability to talk. So what I'll do is I will pop through these 3 questions that you have here, and we'll actually build some of this out pretty quickly. And I saw the first one you had today was how to default a date field on a form to today's date. So what we could do for that is if we start by, I'm going to go ahead and create a workflow here, just a temporary one to hold our flows or hold our form. So that way we can debug it. And we'll go ahead and grab a show form step out here. And I assume on this form, you're looking at, if we went ahead and said, okay, we have a date field and we have the submit button, you just want to see the form pop up and have that defaulted to today's date. Is that correct? And feel free to unmute.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Perfect. Okay, we'll go ahead and set that up here. We'll do a date field, date picker, date. So there are a couple ways to do it, but the one that I usually use is by actually, you can very easily pass it in on the form load. You could use a data flow to actually set that date as well. But the simplest way is if we have a date field here, I just called it date. So that'll be our data name. If I exit out of the form designer and come into the flow designer, we'll see that now I have that form there. Go ahead and connect my submit button up. But I have that date as an input. And what you could do is actually selecting that from flow, or even you could even hit current date time. That'll actually pass it right in.
All right. Hopefully, I'm the only one on this call that gets to see this. We don't have to record that piece. We can.
No, that's okay. Well, I didn't even think about that until I was doing this for you, because I was going to go through the whole data flow and all that, and that popped in my head as soon as I was going through. But if we look now, we'll see it's got today's date in it.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Okay. I will say that this is the first form and flow that I'm building, so
cool.
I have a little bit of an out there, I guess.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Hey, everyone's got to start somewhere. I mean, when I started, I would have had the same question, so it's no problem. That's what these are here for. So what we could do now is we could expand on this, and let's see if we have a combo list of users to use in assigning the next step. Okay. So what we could do here is if we go back into edit our form, we'll get a drop-down list here, and I'll just call it users. Oh, I meant to say users. Users. Hang on. Change that all. But now what we could do is a couple things. If you're using this to assign tasks, there's a couple different ways you can go about it. You can have this be a list of email addresses that are strings, and you could pass that into an add task step. So whatever one they select, on the next form, that input would be that user's email address. You can also, if they're a decisions account, so if they're a current decisions user in the system, what you could do is you could actually use the account type that we have and pass those in as well. I think in our case, I'll do it as the string type because it's kind of the easiest to follow. It takes the least amount of setup. So what I'll do is I'll just select string here in our type, and it's going to say, how do you want to grab that list of users? And two ways you could do it. One is data name, and we can pass it in like we did for the current date. The other is we could actually do a flow and build that logic right here. And I'll do that here actually. So we'll say the import source is going to be flow, and the output, so which one they've selected. So the flow output data name user list. So what this will do is this is going to output. You'll see we'll have this as an output on the form when we get done. We won't be concerned about this though. We'll actually be concerned about this selected item down here. And I'm actually going to say selected user. So that way it's very, very clear as to what it is. So now what I can do is go ahead and say, which flow do I want to use to populate that? So I'll say pick or create. Just create a new one here. And default flow. And we'll say get user, oh goodness, for list. And I'll go ahead and click on create. And now what it's going to do, we have a standard flow, but you'll notice what it's going to do at the end is we're going to have to match this outcome here has to match what that list is expecting. And the reason I left it as just string is because, again, it'll be the easiest one, and I'll show you why here in just a second. But what we could do is for this list of users, we can actually use this fetch entity step to grab all the users within the system and then pass them out as that list. So I could say, we'll go ahead and fetch entities here, connect that up. And it's going to say which ones. Well, here, again, since it's an account that we want to work with, if we come into our search here, we can actually type account. And you'll see we have that as one of the types available. And this will represent all the accounts that are in the system. It's going to pull them back in a big list and give you all their information, anything that you know about them or anything that you set up, like if they have a first and last name in there, the email address associated with it, all sorts of other pieces of information. So we'll select account and pick. So that's for our type name. We don't necessarily have to select anything else down here. If we only wanted to limit it to so many users, you could do that here. We could actually sort it. So that way they're in alphabetical order by their email address. So I'll just say sort by email address here. And that's going to output a list of results. And now all we have to do is say, okay, well, that's good. We'll go ahead and attach these both to our end step here. And now what we want to pass back to that list is that list of users. So we'll say users, and we know it's a string, but it's a list of strings. So it'll be a list of email addresses. So once we've done that, let's save here. We'll see we have a way to actually, where do we want to pull that list of users from? What we could do is we can take in the results of this here will be a list of email addresses or those accounts. So we can go ahead and hit select from flow here. We can see our entity results. So that's the results from that fetch entity step. We can select that. And then if we scroll down, you'll see all these all account ID, all pictures, all account type, all that. These are all lists of other things. So it's saying that this entity results has a big long list of all this information about a user and which piece would you like. And in our case, if I come down here to email, you'll see all email address and it's a string list. And I know that because it has a string, these little brackets, but also because of this icon right here. So it shows like there's multiple things, multiple pieces in a list there. And if I hit all email address and hit done, I now have a flow that simply pulls all my accounts and passes out a list of email addresses. And if we wanted to, we could even debug this And we can see that on our end step here, not many users in my system. There's not a whole lot to look at there, but we do get that list of email addresses there.
And I just want to make sure I'm using the right term. Those are users, not accounts, right? Because I probably 1,000 users, but like I have probably the same 4 accounts you do, or maybe I have 3 of those. But
let me ask this then. So when you're saying you want this account, so users are selecting the person they want to assign this task to, correct?
yes.
Okay. So those users, they don't have to be in decisions. It is certainly would be easier to work with if they were.
And they are.
Okay. So when you do this, you get the same though? You only get these same 4 users?
Well, I just want to make sure that I'm using the right term. So when I look at the list of people that I want to get, I'm going to security and accounts. Accounts I have guest, I have our system administrator, and I have system. So it looks like when I see the list of people that I want, I go to security groups, all users, and those are the objects that I want to see returned in that list. So I'm not sure if those are accounts or if those are users.
Term is interchangeable in our case.
Awesome, great.
So if you can see them in a group, then they are in decisions. They may be nested in a folder. If you don't see them just in that, here, if I hit OK here, duplicate. So like if I come down into system, security, and accounts, we only see these ones here, but do you see any folders?
I do. I have a sub account. Yeah, that's our domain. And then when I click on that, I see all of our accounts. Okay, good.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Yeah, then you should see them. It's just for nesting. They just nested under there.
Okay, excellent. Very good.
So now if I go ahead and exit out all of this and save it, we'll see everything's happy. It matches because it's looking for a string list and we gave it that. So we'll go ahead and exit out of this. And now when I debug this flow here, make sure it didn't, I'm going to ignore the selected user. We don't know who it is before we run the form. Now, if I look, I'll get that list of users.
Very good.
And the good thing too, if I'm not mistaken, it's automatically you can search in here. So if they know the person's email address, for instance, they could start typing it and it'll show those. So if you have thousands of accounts in there, that's a way that you don't have to kind of sit here and scroll through them.
Very good.
But then if we want to take that one step further now, we want to make that person on the next form is having that task. I'll go and grab an add task step out here. Or not. Hang on one second. This is my local instance, so sometimes it messes with me. I do a lot of things you're not supposed to do to try and break it, and I'm pretty good at it. Let's see. There we go. Get that out of there. All right. So now I've gotten back to my same one. I have my form, and now I have my add task. That's what drug out there. And here's where you can say, okay, assign to, and you can see there's no way to draw, have a drop down there. And that's because it's actually nested under here, under this assignment setup.
Okay.
So that ability to pass that in is in here, not up here. So if you hit this edit, we'll get a list, and you'll see the accounts or groups you're trying to pass in right here is at the top. So now what I can say is, okay, let's go ahead and we have to do 2 things here. Because this is expecting a list, we have to tell the system that we're going to build a list, because the user that's being passed out of here isn't a list of users, it's just the selected one. So what we do is we tell the system, okay, you're expecting a list, I only have one thing. So what I can do is I can say, okay, let's build an array or build a list. Unfortunately, we use the 2 terms interchangeably. And once we do that, we get, okay, what's that first item? So that first thing in the list. And now this is where we could say, okay, we'll select that from the flow, and we'll see our selected user from the form. So now once I've done that, if I close out of here, you'll notice this may still be red. If we click off of it, click back on, it'll still be red. But we've actually set them up in here, so it's okay. So we can say task and take action. So I'm just going to make up a name and an action name there. We have to tell it which form to use. I'm actually going to just use the other form we just made, so we don't have to make a new one here. And we'll hit submit. And now we have our form where we select the user and then the user it's assigned to. So if I was to go in and debug this now, select admin, because that's who I'm logged in as currently, we'll see a task has been assigned to my user admin, and I have it set to pop the form up automatically. So it did.
Sweet. Very good.
Those are good, usually procurement routing, things like that. This gets used quite often. A scenario like that. And let's see this last one we had here. Get this little box out of the way. A repeatable grouping of fields on a form where a user selects how many or few instances of the group are required. Okay. So a couple, yeah, there's definitely a way to do that as well. What we can do is we need to build, are you familiar or have you used what we call a data repeater yet?
No.
That's going to be the first thing. So let me swim out to our site here real quick. And
that does sound familiar. It may have come up in the training that I took, but
yeah, I believe it did. And I think Jared, you can confirm that if you're still on here too.
Okay.
Would you want me to confirm?
Oh, sorry. With data repeaters, we go through that in the training courses, don't we? At some point.
I don't believe. I think no. We do in the intermediate. We'll talk about it in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, Bradley, I'm gonna put this link out there in the Zoom chat for you.
Okay.
But we'll actually, I'll take it back from the beginning then and show you how to set that up. I'd already set one up on it before the call, but since you may not have seen that, I'll go ahead and. Oh, thank you, Sabrina. Sent the same link. Okay. So what we could do is we could say, we need to have in decisions to do a data repeater. What that means is exactly what you're looking for. It's a group of fields, and you can have, it kind of shows up like a list, right? Where you've got maybe a previous employer name, a start date, and an end date. And depending on how many rows you need, you can have it show that many of those rows. So you can kind of go in and fill it out. So it'll probably make a little bit more sense once I get into it and show you. But to do that, there's two things that you have to do before we can use it on the form. And the first is we need a data type for it. So a data repeater says, okay, you have some kind of data that we know about, right? It has a structure to it. It has field names, like a name, a start date, and an end date. And we're going to build a list of those data items. So on the form, you're going to fill it out, and the form's going to output a list of whatever that information is, and then you can use it down the road. Kind of similar to what we did on the previous drop-down control. But what I did for this, and I'm actually going to delete these two and just recreate them real quick here, is we'll start by creating that data that we want to get from the user. And to do that, we'll just come up and go through and create a new data type. Now, for our purposes, I'm going to use just defined data structure. I don't need to store it. We're just doing this for demo purposes. And this is kind of the easiest one we have to work with. And I could call this, for instance, previous employment info. So that way I know it's different than the last one I used. And we could say they have an employer name, start date, and an end date. And I'm going to make these just date times. There we go. Also, since these are dates, I'm going to say allow null. That way, if I have a blank value, it's okay, because maybe they haven't ended yet, for example. Maybe they're still working in that employer. So go ahead and hit save here. And that'll just build that up. So now I can use that within my flow and within my data repeater. And the next thing you do is go ahead and actually create that repeater control. And all it is another type of form. It's just a very basic, it's like a form snippet that you kind of create. And we go up to our create form and down to data repeater. And then repeater control. And I'll call this previous repeater. And when I hit create, you're just given this blank form. Like I said, it's just a little piece of the form. By default, it has a grid in it, which makes it easy to kind of keep everything in line. You can make it as big or as small as you'd like. But what we'll do is the first thing you have to do is tell the repeater, what data am I going to work with? So, on a form, you drag and drop controls, you give them names, and that's the data you're working with. And repeaters kind of turn that on its head. You start with the data, and then build the components that are tied to that data. So if we open up our properties window down here, you'll see the first thing it's going to complain about is that there's no input type. So it doesn't know what data we're working with yet. And this is where that data structure comes in that we just built. So I could say pick, and I can see under my current folder here, I have that previous employment info that we just created. So I'm gonna go ahead and use that and hit pick. And now what we do is we build those controls that sit here asking for that data. So I could say we have a text box. We come over here, and instead of giving it a name here, I always come over on repeaters and go to pick from data, so I make sure they match. And when you do that, you expand form data, and now you see we have those 3 properties from that data element we just created. We have that name and that start and that end date. So I'll say the first one is just my name. I'll go ahead and pick that. That's not complaining anymore. We could go to a date picker here. We could say pick from. We'll go to start date on that one. And we'll go to my last one is another date picker. And we'll say that that is the end date on that one. And of course, we'll allow that one to be null as well, because again, if they still work there, that'll kind of give them that idea. And that's it. And what this will do is when decisions runs for each row this you want, it just repeats this over and over and over down the form. It'll have its own little kind of controlled area. You'll see when we put it on the form where it'll build these controls and allow you to scroll through it. So if you have more than can fit on the page, you can keep going through them. And a lot of times I'll create a header row above it that'll have name, start date, end date, because if you put that in here, then it repeats that over and over as well. So, but we'll go ahead and save that. And now we'll go back to our form that we were working on here. Just bounce back to my other tab, and we'll go in back and edit that. So to get that repeater to show up on here, there's actually a special control down under user controls. And we have the various different options here, but data repeater is what we're looking for. So we'll go ahead and drag that up here. I'm gonna go ahead and make it a little bit bigger. Oops. Now the first thing, of course, you can see it's complaining the source isn't set when I move off of it here. So we can go ahead and pick or create the source. And this is where, if we go into pick existing, there's that previous repeater we just built. And now once I do that, it gets a name just like anything else. So I could say, list of previous employment, something like that. You can say which one, are you selecting? Are there line numbers, things like that? It'll automatically put line numbers on it if you'd like. You have separators, you have new rows you can add. If you want to add or remove lines one by one, you can add add or remove buttons here, and then it'll populate one or more as you go. But in our case, you were mentioning you wanted it to, let's see here, they select how many of these they want, and that's what builds this up. So what we could do is, let's say we have a number box, and we'll say number of previous employment. So we'll just put it like that. And I'm going to say it's not a decimal, it's an integer. And now what we could do is we could say, okay, when this updates, I want it to update this with X number of blank controls. So I could say, maybe, let's do that. So what I could do is I could say, okay, well, let's go ahead and let's go into our active form flows here. And actually, I should ask you, does your decisions instance look like mine in version 7?
Yep, I'm on 7. Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, then we'll go ahead and do it this way. So we'll go into our active form flows here. And we'll just say this is update and repeater. Okay, we'll go ahead and edit the flow for it. So now what we'll do is we'll say, okay, we need to know a couple things for this to work. We need to know what is the number that's in that text box. I don't know that I gave it a good name, but we'll see what happens when we come down here and try this. So we're going to go down to our form rules here, and we're going to say, let's get a value from this control. So we'll say get control value, and it's going to ask us which one do we want to get. Well, if I select it, we can go in here, and we could come down to, think it's in form data, isn't it? Yep, it is. And we could find our number box here, which of course, there it is. Number of previous employment number box. Good, I gave it a good name. And we could say, give me the value that's in there. Or we'll just say, we're just gonna say we want to get the value from this box right here. So we'll go into our form data, we'll select our box and we'll hit done. And now we'll see that value has been output here. They call it value, but we'll say, we'll go ahead and leave it like that. And now what we want to do is we need to build a blank list that we can pass back out, because what that'll do is that will update that repeater with the number of rows that we need to have. So it's a little bit of a trick. And what we can do is we could say, we can grab a for loop. So just a for instead of a for each. We grab a for and we're going to say, how many times are we going to run this? So how many rows do we need to have? Well, that number of iterations is going to be whatever that value is from this number of positions box. So we can just go ahead and select that value that came out of it. So this is going to run however many times we have. So now what we'll do is we're going to build that list. So I'm going to grab and add item to list step here. And I'll be happy to send you this project over email when we get done as well. So I know it's a lot to take in, and probably a lot of new steps you haven't used before.
Definitely.
But we'll say add item to list and we'll say done. So what we're oops, did not hit the trash can. There we go. So now we're going to say is, okay, for each one of these runs, add another one, add another blank one to it. We'll say add it to the end. We have to tell what type of list are we working with. That needs to match that same type that repeater's working off of. So if we remember from earlier, we had one called previous employment info. And it's going to say, okay, what's the new item? What's the list I'm working with? What's the new list? The original list, I've done a trick here. You're learning a couple tricks today. If you notice, I went ahead and told this step to go back to the loop when it was done. So now I've kind of created this loop here. Yeah. And because I've done that, I can tell it to, when this step is done, it's creating a new list, and I can tell it will use that same list. So basically, you're going to keep building every time it loops through these couple steps. So I can now select my list called new list right here. So that's the original one. The new one, we also want to change the value of our new list. So basically, my original one is new. My new list is going to be just changing the value, so updating it, adding that row to it. And my new item, what I can do is, we remember our name and our start date have to be filled in. We said they can't be null. So we could actually just say something like, maybe the name is the iteration or the number that we're on, like the line number. And the start date, we could just say the current date. That'll satisfy those requirements. And we could say done. Now what'll happen is, for every time this runs, it'll add that next line, it'll build that list. And now we can just say, well, we're going to output that list. So I'm just going to select it from my data there. And now this will build however many rows. It'll populate it and pop it back out. And actually, I need to back up one. So I learned all of this in Decisions version 6, and we changed a lot between 6 and 7. And I'm showing you the new way, and I forgot a step. We actually made this easier than what I was just going to do. So just like we had a get control value here that went out and grabbed that new value, every time we type it, it's going to get that new value and run this flow. We do the same to update the form as well. And what we'll do is, instead of getting a control value, we're going to set a control value when it's done. So it built the list, and now we're going to tell it to go update that form control. And what that form control is if we go back into our form data, we're going to grab our repeater, wherever it went to, data repeater. And we'll see what's the source, what's the selected item. Well, the source is going to be that list that we just built. Oops, there it is. So there's that list. And these two don't matter. We're not going to have a selected item or a selected line number. So now all we have to do, we have all the logic built that's going to build our number of rows we need. Now what we'll do is we need to tell it when to run this. So we need to give it a trigger. And what I want to do is just say, well, every time this box is updated, go ahead and run it. So we'll say value changed. We'll hit OK. So now what we could do is we'll go ahead and save out of this. We'll run our debugger. And if I hit a 3 in here, we get our 3 rows.
Very good.
And conversely, now if I change it, we get 2. And there are tricks. So if I didn't set these where if I set all this where they could be null, you wouldn't have to put any values in this, and it would still work.
Yeah.
For purposes of this, since I'd already done that, I left it alone. But again, it'll give you all this different data. So if I make some changes in here, and if I say thing 1, and if I say thing 2, for example, oops, I have to select a user here. If I get rid of that form, we'll see on the output of my form now, I got that list that I can then work with here.
Excellent.
So then you could pass that into a, another database, or you could, save that for later, or, put it into a flow execution extension or something like that.
Yeah, very good.
Awesome. And like I said, I'll export this and email it to you when we get done. I've got your email forwarded from Sabrina.
Excellent. And then how do I get a copy of this webinar, being it's being recorded? Is that something like you could also send me? Or the link to it?
Yeah, Sabrina, how do we usually handle it? Is that a channel that we have set up for it? The recordings?
Yes, so all of the recordings are posted on YouTube, usually a couple of hours after the session. I will post the link to the YouTube page in the chat right now.
Great. Thank you, Sabrina.
So, okay. Well, let me go ahead. I'm going to pop open the Q&A here and see. We had a question come up while we were talking. Let's see here. So the question says, is there a way for data repeaters to inherit the outcome scenarios from the parent form? Like instead of just complete as an outcome scenario, it has the scenarios like approve or reject based on what are the scenarios in the form that contains the data repeater. So yeah, that would be honestly in how you set up the repeater and how you set up the forms. I'm not mistaken here. 1 second here. Thought there was. Yeah, so you have the ability to output your outcome name. So if you click on your form, when you hit, if you have a form with a repeater on it, you could have that outcome name output as well. So if you had multiple buttons like approve, reject, etc., you could actually pass that along down through the flow and then be able to pick that up, on steps that are downstream from it. That would be one way to handle it. I'm sure there are definitely multiple ways, but that would probably be the easiest way to handle it. Awesome. Well, those are all the pre-prepared questions we had, or pre-submitted questions we had today, and all that I saw in the Q&A. I can hang on the line here for another couple minutes if there are any other questions that would come up. Okay. Oops. Yeah, you're welcome. Very welcome. Awesome. All right, everybody. Listen, I appreciate everybody's time today. I had some really great questions as always. Again, we are here Monday through Friday at noon Eastern. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time if you have questions that you'd like answered. You can email them in, and we will be more than happy to, as you saw today, go ahead and answer those in live and in real time with you. So I would like to say, well, from Virginia Beach now, signing off, everybody have a great rest of your day.